Hello everyone and welcome to another video. Now today we're taking a look at another Dell OEM graphics card. This time it's their version of the 12GB RTX 3060, a card that I actually really like. This one has likely been pulled from an Inspiron desktop at some point in time, but I found it on eBay being sold separately for £220. It was the cheapest one on the site at the time of purchase, with a couple of obscure brand blower style cards retailing at a minimum of £10 to £20 more. While there isn't a reference or founder's design 3060, there are reference specs, or rather a reference boost clock, which this conforms to on paper. That speed is 1777 MHz. Providing it has the thermal and power headroom to do so, it will go higher, as is the standard with modern cards. The first thing I really like about this Dell 3060 is that the fans stop under low load. This isn't always the case with OEM cards, and I wasn't expecting it here. A pleasant surprise indeed. This card will idle at 37 degrees most of the time, with the fans switched off. We also have a single 8-pin power connector, which most 3060s have, as well as that signature green Dell PCB. This divides opinions for sure, but I really like it. Even though it's pretty much entirely covered by the backplate at the rear, another welcome and unexpected inclusion, the little bit of green just peeking out adds a bit of uniqueness to this plain looking graphics card. The GeForce RTX logo also lights up white, or maybe it's more of a very pale blue, but again, it's another subtle feature that adds a little bit of excitement to this no frills offering. Before we get into the games, let's take a look under the hood. To do this, we need to remove these 9 screws. Even more if we want to detach the back plate as well. As you can see, I've left a few of the thermal pads behind, but taking the heatsink off reveals the tiny green PCB in all its glory. So far, there's nothing that would stop me recommending this OEM 3060 if it was cheaper than other, let's say, big brand cards where you live. Let's hope it doesn't sound like a jet engine in operation. Let's talk about noise and thermals then as we get into our first game, which is Call of Duty Warzone. Excuse the poor afterburner labelling, I forgot to change the name in the software to RTX 3060, so I had to slap this black bar on screen with the card's name in editing. I said before that the reference boost clock was 1777 MHz, but I found that this Dell card actually hits at least 1900 most of the time. In fact, it settles at 1905 MHz as an average. Every time I glanced at the on-screen stats, this is the number that was reported. I also noticed that the card didn't seem to exceed 70 degrees, and while the fans weren't particularly loud, there was a noticeable whining noise. This was nothing that penetrated the sound barrier my cheap headphones provided, but it was there, and worth mentioning. That said, I've had more expensive cards that have whined far louder. I'm pretty happy with this Dell 3060, so let's focus on the performance from here on out, because the 3060 in my opinion is still a solid 1080p GPU for anyone looking to build a mid-range gaming setup in 2023. COD Warzone at 1080p with the Ultra preset on screen now with Filmic SM-AAT2X, hit an average of over 100 FPS with a 1% low of 82 and a 0.1% low of 53. Our next game is Cyberpunk 2077. This has received the 2.0 update. I think it's on version 2.2 now, something like that. But at 1080p with a high preset, we saw 82 FPS. I've avoided using DLSS or FSR where possible, and where I can hit at least 60 frames per second. But there may be a couple of scenarios where I've had to switch it on in more demanding titles. Here though, with 82 FPS on average and a 1% low of 58 with a 0.1% low of 47, Cyberpunk performed very well on the Dell 3060. Now when it comes to Fortnite and any online competitive game, I'd certainly recommend turning the settings down for as many frames as possible. Here though, I wanted to push the 3060 a bit more, so I went with 100% resolution scale with the high preset, nanite enabled, virtual shadows set to high, and lumen set to high as well. I never thought Fortnite would end up looking this nice, to be honest. 84 FPS on average with a 1% low of 60 and a 0.1% low of 44. Next up we have Forza Horizon 5 1080p with the Ultra preset. This is a very well optimised title, and here on the 3060 it runs at 103 frames per second. Probably could have pushed things to extreme, to be honest, but that said, it's nice to see that the average frame rate and the percentile lows are really high, and the performance overall is very consistent. Marvel Spider-Man next, high preset here. I also enabled the ray traced reflections, which I wouldn't usually do, but again this pushed the 3060 a little more. You could go with the very high preset and ray traced reflections off if you wanted to, but here with the improved reflections we still saw 87 FPS with a 1% lower 58 and a 0.1% lower 46. I think it's going to be our CPU, the i5-12400F, that's going to let us down in some of those busier areas where there's a lot of on-screen NPCs in the city. And considering we're in the city a lot of the time, yeah, the i5-12400F does suffer a little bit. It can be the limiting factor in some instances, for example. Red Dead Redemption 2 with the ultra textures and everything else set to high with, anisotropic filtering set to X8, TAA medium, the geometry LOD set to max and the grass LOD set to 2 out of 10 looks absolutely fantastic and runs like a dream with 97 FPS. I saw a little dip and drop here and there, especially when we were approaching Valentine, but this was rather insignificant and we ended up with a 1% low of 73 and a 0.1% low of 57, so the 3060 could certainly be pushed to 1440p, especially thanks to the 12 gigs of GDDR6 VRAM. Starfield up next, and this is one of the games. This might in fact be the only game where we had to use DLSS in order to achieve over 60 FPS. Here with the medium preset then and DLSS set to balanced, we saw 70 frames per second with a 1% low of 49 and a 0.1% low of 34. I often debate about keeping Starfield in the benchmarks, but as a game, I quite enjoy it. It's a shame it doesn't run better, of course. It is still within the top 100 most played games on Steam as well. No matter what you think of the game, it is quite testing on modern hardware. Whether or not that's because it's naturally demanding or just unoptimised, I'm not 100% sure. But there we go. It runs with at least 60 FPS here, but we do need help from upscaling. Finally then, it's The Last of Us with the medium preset, and no DLSS or FSR was required here in order to hit over 60 FPS. We saw 73 on average with a 1% low of 57 and a 0.1% low of 49, an impressive result indeed. In conclusion, the Dell RTX 3060 I think is a decent looking card, quite subtle in its appearance, but I like the green PCB, I like the light up GeForce RTX logo, and for the 3060 as a whole in 2023 there's a reason that it's top of the Steam hardware survey still, and I think it's certainly that 12 gigs of RAM that helps. That and the constantly falling prices as well. I believe in a way that this is going to be the next sort of anomaly, if you will, very much like the 1080 Ti was for Nvidia and still is. In a way, it's not necessarily as capable, of course. I think more on the side of just its popularity is going to continue, and I think as the years go on and this gets cheaper and cheaper, I think it's always going to be tempting. Now, sort of at the mid-range, and perhaps 2 or 3 years' time at the more budget range. This will be the sub £200 or dollar card to buy, I reckon. But there we go. Let me know what you think down below. I hope you've enjoyed this look at the Dell OEM RTX 3060, one of, I feel, Dell's better OEM cards. If you enjoyed this one, leave a like, leave a dislike if you didn't. Subscribe to the channel if you haven't done so already, and hopefully I'll see all of you in the next one.